A very good evening to you and welcome to today's edition of Politics 101. Today, our guest is Mr. Winston Jordan, former finance minister in the coalition government. And we are, of course, going to be talking economics and everything else that surrounds that. Um, I want to welcome you all to the program. Those of you in Guyana or outside of Guyana, welcome. Welcome to the regulars and welcome to the new viewers because I understand that more and more we're getting new viewers and I want to welcome you to Politics 101. This is a zone of reasoning, a zone of information, a zone of analysis, and a zone that is dedicated to the mobilization of people in ways that equip them with the necessary information that they need, that we need. And that is why we bring guests on to help us to walk through some of these thorny issues that keep coming up over and over again. Would know that, of course, when you're dealing with any government, you need experts in the various areas to help us walk through what is happening. But especially when you're dealing with a government of this nature, it is very important that we keep ourselves on top of what is happening. This is a government that every day tries to find new ways and new means of flouting the law, of engaging in the kind of politics on economics of domination that we have become accustomed to this past year. And note, I didn't say just the politics of domination, but the economics of domination, because as we've been saying over and over on this program, is that we're not dealing with crazy people. At a certain level, we can say they're crazy because of the way, but we're dealing with people who are very steeped in the politics of intrigue and the politics of long range outcome. And so we have to treat what they're doing within the context of policy. And we're accustomed to talking about the politics of domination. But one of the things that we're seeing here is how economic policy feeds into that politics of domination. And so that is why we have this talk on the economy ever so often. I know we are not a people that are given to the intricacies of economics and that kind of thing. It's easy to understand politics. It's not as easy to understand political economy. That is how the politics interfaces with economics and vice versa. I remember when I was at UT long time ago, I wanted to major in economics. I just read or attempted to read Karl Marx, Das Kapital in those days. I didn't get very far, but I'd read enough to raise my interest in economics, and I started out wanting to major in economics, and then I got to a course called econometrics at that time. I didn't fancy myself too much of a mathematics person. And so that was the end of economics for me. Later on, when I get to graduate school, I encountered economics again. By that time, I was much more matured. And so one of my minors was political economy. And I know that we run away from mathematics, we run away from economics, but I want us to to get accustomed to dealing with economics here, because a lot of the politics going forward will be the politics of the economy and the politics of foreign policy. Those two things are going to be critical to the politics going forward. So once again, welcome you to the program, and I want to welcome Winston Jordan. Mr. Winston Jordan, welcome again to Politics 101.
Thank you, David, and thank you for inviting me once again on the Politics 101. Welcome to your viewers. Before you field questions to me, I would just like, with your permission, to read a statement that I was forced to put out today after people kept calling me about some accusations and allegations that were made by Nanlal at some press conference he had at Office of the President today. So I just had to put out a short statement.
No problem. I just read the statement and was going to start with that. But go right ahead and read the statement, and then I'll field my question.
Okay, great. Okay, so this is a statement by Winston Jordan, former Minister of Finance, in response to a statement by Mohabir Anil Nanlal, Attorney General. Today, Thursday, October 14, 2021, I was alerted to a statement made by Mohabir Anil Nanlal, Attorney General, in which he alluded to an investigation into the dealings of the APNU AFC government. Specifically, he mentioned that a file into the conduct of former Finance Minister Winston Jordan will very shortly be sent to the Guyana Police Force for the commencement of a criminal investigation. It was further alleged that I am implicated in a number of nefarious transactions. These allegations are false, baseless, and repugnant. As on a previous occasion, circa November 2020, I say without fear that they are designed to impugn my character, tarnish my image, and lower my esteem in the eyes of my family, friends, admirers, well-wishers, and the general public. Moreover, they are intended to intimidate me in light of my scathing criticism of the government's approach to development of my beloved country. I cannot and will not be intimidated. I wish to thank all those persons who have praised my stewardship in office, continue to express full confidence in me, and urge me to raise my voice higher and harder for a better Guyana. I wish to reassure everyone that I, Winston Jordan, former Minister of Finance in the coalition government, perform my duties to the best of my abilities with the oath of my office and to the best of my abilities in compliance with the oath of my office. This I have done in my over 35 years of public service in various capacities. I have consulted with my lawyers on this latest attempt to malign me in public, and we have agreed on a certain course of action. Aluta continue. That represents my statement on these allegations or accusations, which I feel very...
We've lost your, here we go. We lost you there for a moment. You were just to the point about consulting with your lawyers.
Yes, I said I was consulting. I have consulted with my lawyers, and we have agreed to a certain course of action. And then I ended with Aluta continue. As you know, meaning the struggle continues.
The struggle continues, and thanks for that statement, Mr. Jordan. I just read it about 10 minutes ago because I didn't know of these developments, and I think you've nailed it on the head there when you talk about criminalizing members of the former administration and to lower yourself, your esteem, the esteem in which you are held. Why would the government, having seen what's happening, insist on this course of action, Winston?
I really don't know, because every one of my criticism of well, they fall into two categories. One, everybody bashed the coalition government, rightly or wrongly. But there was a lot that the coalition did that was good for Guyana. And these have got submerged in the bashment that has taken place. And I, being a proud member of the coalition government and the cabinet, will not let it stand. And where I have information, where I can recall information, dates, time, places, policies, and so on, I bring it out to the public. I bring what is under the surface to the public domain. So, for example, where this government came in claiming the government did nothing and so forth, but are using every available policy, project, or so on without any acknowledgement that it belonged to the past government or was initiated the past government, I am there to set the record straight. In fact, a board whispered in my ears after they read what was said by Nanlal today, that they had heard the day before that I had raised the angst of the government when I debunked the nonsense that was being peddled by Teixeira in New York, Queens, New York, that Ali being a Muslim had brought goodwill from the Arab world to Guyana. And I had debunked that. I debunked it, and Demerara Waves carried it, and I debunked it for this morning on CAMS TV. So I heard that raised the angst of them, and he came out with this thing. Well, I could reassure your viewers, I don't care what they do. I cannot be intimidated, and I will not be intimidated. And in fact, I will continue to raise the bar higher. I will not go into hiding because I have nothing to hide. I have nothing to fear. I did my job honestly, fairly, impartially. So he can threaten or do whatever he wishes. He can threaten or do whatever he wishes. No allegation he put to me, and I have none to answer.
Mm-hmm. And it's a clear case, I think, of the pot saying to the kettle that your bottom is black. The PPP has mastered the art of, for example, rigging elections, even within their party, but accusing others of rigging election, and they've gotten away with it. And the fact that the coalition government did not pursue criminal action against them for clear violations that occurred in the 23 years, they now feel that the best way of burying their own corruption when in government is to project the coalition as being corrupt when they were in government. And I think you're right, that kind of thing has to be fought back. You mentioned that the coalition did some things and the government has come in and tried to give the impression the coalition did nothing. And some of the very things that the coalition did, they're quietly pursuing it, but they're not making any noise. And I want to take you straight to the sugar question, the question of sugar. Because I found when Mr. Jacquio went for Beast and then I think he went to Wales and talk about the grant that they are giving to sugar workers, that made the news. But I think something that didn't quite catch on in the news was the fact, was the subtle admission that this thing about reopening the estates as something that can be done the first day that they came into office, that they're not able to do so. Am I reading wrongly or?
Look, you're reading it correctly. And if we even go quickly, backtrack a little bit, back to Jagdeo. Jagdeo is the one who started closing estates. I think people either don't want to remember that or he was skillful in letting that fact not come back to the fore. But Diamond Estate, LBI, Lenora, I think it was the Lenora or Enmora one. I think possibly, probably. Those disappeared under Jagdeo's presidency. So he knew there and then that the writing was on the wall for sure. He then came up with this grand Skeldon estate to replace all other estates, because Skeldon was meant to produce, I believe, 120,000 tons of sugar. So in essence, that meant a number of other estates would have been closed, because that factory had to be fed cane from the Skeldon area and from the larger Skeldon area. So perhaps factories within the contiguous area would have been closed to allow those fields to feed the massive Skeldon factory. And so they pumped 200 million US of Gaisuko's money, of monies that were given to them by the European Union, right? And if I remember well, the European Union gave over 150 million US dollars over a 4 or 5 year period. They used some of those monies, and they borrowed roughly $100+ million from the World Bank, from the Caribbean Development Bank, and some reserves that were given to us from the IMF. All of those resources were plowed into Gaisuko. And today what you have a white elephant, not a black elephant, a white elephant that has never worked. And nobody is remembering, in addition to that money that was plowed, another 120+ million US dollars was plowed into that factory to make it work. They brought consultants from all over the place. You name it, they brought the consultants. South Africa, Australia, India, Cuba, Brazil, among the number of consultants that they brought to try to rectify that estate. But they couldn't put Humpty Dumpty together again. They couldn't put it. And so that estate has been there, wallowing. In fact, a lot of people said from day one, it was mired in a lot of controversies. A lot of controversies. It was eventually given to a Chinese contractor, I believe, Cintiq or CNTIC or something like that. It was given, but there has been word out there that an Indian contractor should have won the bid, and that bid was even lower. But there are a lot of things that are being talked about why the Indian contractor never got the bid and so on. But that now is water on the bridge. The fact of the matter is that the Chinese built it, it didn't work, right? So that when we came in 2015, sugar was in a bad way. Sugar was in a bad way. We did what the PPB government maybe ultimately would have had to do in 2020 when they came into power, right? We did that. That is to close estates that really and truly couldn't make it. And among those estates that had to be closed is that same Skeldon estate. Mm-hmm. So from 7 estates, 4 were earmarked and identified to be closed. And their assets were transferred to NISIL under a special purpose unit that was established in 2018 for that purpose. 3 estates remain in Albion, Blairmont, Iflot. And these estates were meant to produce roughly 150,000 tons of sugar by the end of a 5-year, I think the end of a 5-year period, by 2023, I think, from 2017 to 2023, thereabouts. Right? That it was expected that with their rehabilitation, recapitalization, and so on, they will be able to produce roughly 150,000. The other 4 estates, the idea was to divest them in whole or in part, not necessarily to remain in sugar, but in other activities. Mm-hmm. In fact, it was expected that from the divestment sales, we would have accumulated about $47 billion. And contrary to what Clive Thomas said in your program the last time, we didn't expect Gaisuko to repay the bond, which I will come to just now. We didn't expect Gaisuko to do that. It is NISIL who was going to repay the bond from the proceeds of the divestment. Yeah? Because if you were expecting $47 billion, 30 had to be used roughly to repay the bond, 30, 32, 33, depending on how much is the interest. Some amount was going to be plowed into the 3 estates that was remaining, and some amount would have gone to the treasury, given the fact that we were financing Gaisuko from the Treasury all the time. Some amount would have gone back to the Treasury. That is how that money would have been split. We went and got that $30 billion bond to finance those 3 estates because having shed the four estates to Nisel, Cabinet had made the decision that Gaisuko will be off of the Treasury. They will have to be financed from the bond, right, until they catch up, that they finance themselves again, and until the divestment proceeds kicked in, that they could help support the capital program and the operational plan. Okay, so that was the plan. No more financing from the Treasury. And as soon as we made that decision, resources were freed up that we were able to ramp up spending in the health sector, in the education sector, higher wages, and so forth. All of that is reflected in our budgets and our outcomes that you could see. All right, so there's no mystery to it. In severing those 4 estates, contrary to all the talk that you're hearing about 7,000 workers, 4,800 workers were severed, and I am daring Gaisuko again to bring the numbers of people who were severed and paid their full severance and benefits by the coalition government. I am daring them to show the 7,000 people, not their claiming, but has been put out there and being used as some magic number. In fact, only recently, a study was done by Thomas Singh at the University of Guyana. I don't know, you might be aware of him.
Yes, I know Thomas.
And the study was done on the auspices of the United Nations. And in that study, he referenced 5,100 who were severed. Now, I don't quibble between 4.8 and 5.120 because we are close, right?
Mm-hmm.
So, workers difference, and it could have been due to the late severing or the late payment of severance of the Wales estate workers, because with Wales estate that was closed in 2016, whereas the other 3 estates were closed in 2017. In the context of in Wales, they weren't treating them as severed workers. New employment will be available to them at IFL, which would have remained open. But there was a lot of argument to and fro about whether we could have done that, whether Gaisuko could have done that, or whether they should be severed and then re-employed, and so forth. And the matter went to court, okay, and the matter was settled in the workers' favors that they had to be paid their severance. So I'm not going to quibble between the 4,800 figure that I know about and the 5,120 figure that is mentioned in Dr. Thomas Singh's report. But none of these 2 figures get anywhere near to 7,000. But yet still you see the press using 7,000, Jagdeo using 7,000, and everybody else using 7,000, because this magic figure puts out there, right, or connotes the callousness of the coalition in doing what had to be done. What had to be done. And look, let me just quickly digress. When the coalition on the height was forced to do the structural adjustment program in 1988, that's when we started that massive structural adjustment program. And in 1989, when we made the 2 rapid devaluations, and in 2000, when we made the massive devaluation, all of that was done in the initial period without a social impact program in place. Now, I'm not saying it is right to do it and so on, but circumstances at the time dictates some of the hard measures that you're forced to take. Remember when we came into power in 2015, Gaisuko was swimming in red ink, $90 billion of it. $90 billion of it. And let us see quickly. This government came into power in August 2020. And by up to last month, even Jagdeo was forced to admit that $14 billion, $14 billion had been pumped into Gaisuko. 14 billion had been pumped into Gaisuko. And by the way, he didn't count the 200 million that was given to them for wage increases. He didn't count that 200 million. He didn't count the increases that he had agreed to for those who went on strike and said because of the flood, they were getting reduced incomes. And therefore, they were striking to get their original incomes. And the government agreed to pay them the original income because it was flood related. He didn't count all those additional sums of money that go. 14 billion went directly. And then he said another one, not he, the agriculture minister said, another 1.6 billion would be needed before the end of the year. So you're talking roughly $16 billion in just over a year pumped into Gaisuko. And then the great one comes to quarantine. And without telling them that, but implying it as much to say, look, we tried, but we failed. We tried, but we failed. And therefore, we're going to give you a handout, because we can't employ you anymore in these estates. These estates are no good anymore, and we are not going to be able to open them back. He didn't say that, but that is implied. That is implied in word, mouth, in deed, will be implied in action. This is the government, okay? When we were about to get buyers, this is the government that told those buyers in no uncertain terms, threatened them if they conclude any deal with us, this government will not recognize it, and all this kind of stuff. So when you chase them away, you think they're going to come back here today? They're not going to come back here today. They're not going to come back. And this is what you have. So the scenario that you have right now is exactly as you've seen it, which is those estates are incapable, right? Incapable of returning to any production that makes any sense. Those estates are incapable of meeting a production cost that is competitive on the world market. Sugar, as we know it, and even though you haven't done economics, you've done political economy, sugar, after slavery, when sugar got free labor, after sugar became labor, sugar became progressively costly and uncompetitive. And throughout the history, they tried to raise substitutes against cane sugar, beet sugar, sweeteners, all these things they did, because king sugar was dying a slow but painful death. And when the EU removed, lastly, the special price that we were getting for sugar, sugar died in Guyana, because sugar was never going to be able in Guyana on those production costs to compete in the open market. Never. So that is where you are today.
Yes, and that point has to be made, very loudly. I remember visiting St. Kitts a lot when they were getting out of sugar. And they had an extensive consultation with the country and so on before they did it. And there were lots of people who were saying, don't do it. But the government bit the bullet and got out of sugar. And that was about, 2 decades ago or even more? Yes. Correct. And I always use the St. Kitts model because it's a small population, and getting out of sugar, you really were risking everything, because yes, there was tourism, but they had dependent on sugar for all this time, and they did it and they got out of sugar, and today St. Kitts probably have the lowest unemployment rate. Correct. Speaking, correct me if I'm wrong here.
Correct. And David, what I want to tell you now that you mentioned St. Kitts is that when St. Kitts closed their factory and forgot about sugar, they weren't in a position to pay severance.
Right.
They weren't in a position to pay severance. And this went on for a long period, maybe a couple of years. And I always recall when I was in St. Kitts in 2015 for an IMF, yes, it was an IMF one-day seminar that I went to there. When I was coming out, the airport was just very close. And when I found out what was going on, they said Maduro was visiting. And Maduro literally had bought a bag of money to present to the St. Kitts government to help them pay off the severance. Finally, after how much years, the people got the severance. But you know what? The coalition government was pilloried. Pilloried in 2018. Because the severance of the workers was in 2017. When we could not pay the severance immediately. Pilloried. We had brought out our budget in 2017, December, for the 2018. And that severance of workers took place after we brought out the budget. So we didn't budget for any severance or any notion of severance at that time. We had to go back in January 2018 to budget money to pay the severance. And in the process, cut programs in the process. But we did. We bit the bullet. We paid the severance. We paid all the pensions that was going to the people, all their outstanding vacation leave, everything. Everything we paid. We even paid the interest that the judge ruled that we had to pay as a result of paying the severance late. All of that we paid. We bit the bullet and we did it. And lest your viewers think that was the end. That wasn't the end. We held massive training programs. I didn't even know Kidaki was part of it. Massive training programs to help train those who would have liked to use their monies to get into businesses. We exposed many of them to the Small Business Bureau. The government took over ancillary facilities like the drainage and irrigation, all them canals and so forth, were now under the DNI Ministry of Agriculture. We took over the health dispensaries and so on that used to be run by Guy Suko. We took over the Port Moran Training School. All those things had now come onto the books of the government. So when you hear we were always in difficulty trying to meet some of our manifesto promises, it's because of some of those things. It's because of those things.
I'm muted here. Thanks, Mr. Jordan. It's not 7,000 workers. All of us use that number because it's the number that has been out there. So you hear it there now. Mr. Jordan is saying that his number is considerably less. Thomas Singh, who's an economist at Fuji, and no friend of the coalition, did a report and said it was 5,000, which 2,000 less than 7,000, and that's a lot. That they're inflating the number by. So that's one. Two, you learn that whereas some place like St. Kitts did not pay their severance until 15, because I think they got out of sugar in the late 90s, 1990s, 1998, 1999, 2000, around then. And I'm now hearing that 2015 is when they, and you paid your severance the year after. So we are learning some truth here tonight. Because often people throw something, and then the media picks it up, and they use it, and the rest of us, we take that number from the media, and we use it. And so therefore, we now know that that number is inflated by at least 2,000, workers. We're also learning tonight that in effect, what Mr. Jagdeo did was to admit that the coalition was right. You cannot salvage those estates. The Guyana economy is not an island. It's linked to a regional economy, hemispheric economy, global economy, more than that. Sugar is not an island by itself. It has linkages and implications for the rest of the economy. If you pour all of that money, how much money you all poured into Gaisuko in those 5 years?
In that 5 years, we had the $30 billion bond that came in 2018, and by the time we left in August of 2020, 10.7 billion had already been disbursed to Gaisuko.
To Gaisuko.
End of the year, and by the end of the year, I think roughly about 15. By the end of January the following year, over 15 billion had been disbursed to Gaisuko.
There you go, and that's only during your time. I mean,
that's the bond part. But
that's the bond part.
Prior to that, we had sunk over $40 billion into Gaisuko. Over $40 billion into Gaisuko. So in that period, over 50-something billion dollars had been sunk into Gaisuko for a government that they claim was heartless.
That's right.
For a government that had nothing to do with the state of Gaisuko at 2015.
That's right, because the PNC and the other opposition parties had been out of office for over 2 decades.
For 23 years, we were out of office.
Yeah. So let me take you to the next level. This $250,000 that they are giving these sugar workers, these separate sugar workers. Now you know that it's not 7,000. So that 2,000, the $250,000 for that extra 2,000 is going somewhere. But you made a point, which I had not thought of when I think that disbursement may be illegal, unconstitutional, and it should be taken to court. Expand on that for us.
Yes, because if, as they claim, we were heartless and we severed these people and we didn't pay them, you imagine a lawyer is on record as saying that the reason why the government must pay this $250,000 is because the coalition government severed, they were heartless, they severed these people and didn't pay them any severance pay. You imagine a lawyer who's an MP is saying this? Man, you can understand how our education system, look, don't let me blame the education system, but I was flabbergasted when I heard this. So come back to your point. You paid severance. The workers were given everything I told you that was due to them. Everything. So that's it. That's it. If you come now to give these workers a cash grant, suggesting that it's additional to the severance, you have to have a legal basis of doing it. Because legally they were paid everything that is due to them. And I said, if you want to think about the Buxton proposal, this cannot be likened to the Buxton proposal, because the Buxton proposal was saying that everybody, every household should get this amount. And even then, you will require a law. You will require to put in place a law for that kind of transfer, annual transfer. You couldn't just go into a pot, dip it out, and hand it over. You have to put a law in place and how it will be regulated, accounted, and all these kinds of stories. But you are going to be given a select group with no basis of doing so, $250,000. And that is why I say it has legal implications. It has legal implications. I even suggested that based on the fact that sometimes governments may want to recognize that what was given to you might have been little. For example, you know Sister Muniz, who used to be a professor at UG. By the time she retired, her pension was nothing. So the government brought a bill in relation to her to up her pension over and above what is legally due to her. It's called ex gratia payment. The same thing was done for Professor Walcott. who was vice chancellor of the university. And the same thing was done for Hamilton Green, if you remember the Hamilton Green bill. These things are specific to the individuals or the group. Whenever Hamilton Green is called home, that bill is dead. The bill is specific to Hamilton Green. So they would, if they want to go down the road, they possibly have to go and bring a law or legal thing to make it some kind of ex gratia payment over and above what they did for the severance. But in doing that, it will also call into question the aspect to do with equality under the law. Because you had severed bauxite workers at Kokwani who weren't even paid the severance. You had severed public servants post-2020. And indeed, everybody else with a similar situation that they were severed and so on, they would have a case to put that they were discriminated against. Because they cannot find a basis of handing out $250,000 to sugar workers who had been severed and paid their severance. They could not find a basis that could stand up in court.
Have you raised this with some lawyers, Winston, or have lawyers contacted you?
I have raised it with key lawyers that I usually raise these things with because I'm just an economist, right? A little bit of the law I'm trying to understand, having hung around a couple of lawyers and so forth. I've raised it with them, and they have said, in fact, publicly, Kem Ramjatan says that this is a point that he will be pursuing. He said this on his program, AFC on the Move program. He said that he will be pursuing it, and I was happy to hear that. And I was thinking that some of the other lawyers I spoke to, they are, I won't give out the strategy that is in place, but they are aware of it, and they indicate to me that it's interesting that I brought it up. They didn't think about it in that way, and they are going to be pursuing it using different grounds.
Good. My colleague here, Ali Majid, is reminding us that the workers were paid all their severance in conformity with the collective labor agreement between Gawo and Gaisuku.
Correct.
Right. So this was done with the law behind it.
That's correct.
And now you are coming and giving them that extra money. Colette, good night from Pennsylvania in the house. Listen, let's move on. They didn't stop. He didn't stop at the $250,000. He then said there's some high-paying jobs in the oil and gas industry that would be set aside for these workers who have gotten their severance. Then they are getting $250,000. Then they will be trained, and while they're being trained, they will be given 3 and 4 days a week work. And then when they're trained, there are these jobs that have been set aside for them. When does it stop?
Well, David, you see, this is the whole, it makes me wonder whether it's worth, it's worth living in Guyana under the present circumstances.
Yeah.
Because the injustice that you see, the advantage taken that you see that is taken on. Because whatever you said is absolutely correct. And I had raised the point, and it has now come to the fore, that what Jagdeo has done is creating a precedent. And it's also is going to rile up workers who did not take the severance or who did not work severed. And a couple days ago, there, I think, was Albion or so on, striking to be included in the package of $250,000.
Yeah.
You have created an incentive for people now to walk off the estates en bloc, request their severance, then collect the 250,000 and be a part of those who you're identifying now for 4 days work. Because you see, the people who are still working, they feel done in by. They're feeling cheated. They're feeling cheated. And therefore they're saying they're having none of it. They went on strike. Now I wanted to know how the PPP is going to get out of that. If those people persist in saying they have to get the 250,000 too. Because PPP relents and pays them the 250,000 also, then now the whole country.
Vincent, I want you to repeat that. Because that part went straight over my head. And I'm sure for a lot of people, that part went over their head. So there are workers who continue to work, didn't take the severance. Now they're seeing those who took the severance are getting all these other goodies.
Right.
So they are now saying, it's like people who say, look, I am working here, I'm earning this amount, but people who are on welfare are getting, I am, and so it's repeated for the audience.
No, I think it's very, very clear what I'm saying. A couple of days ago, there was a strike at Albion, and the workers were saying they have to be paid the 250,000 too. They have to be included in the 250,000. All right, because I think they are being, they are feeling done in by the fact they didn't take a severance. Because all these goodies are being pushed to those who, quote unquote, were severed. They're going to get 250,000. They're going to get 3 and 4 days work. They're going to be trained. And most of all, they are going to be identified for higher paying jobs than back-breaking jobs in the sugar industry.
Yes.
And they're saying they're having none of it. They're saying they're having none of it. We want the 250,000 too. And perhaps we want to also be trained for high-paying jobs in the oil sector. This is the kind of folly. It's the kind of broken policy formation, deformed policy formation that you have in. I am trying to keep my ears to the ground because I'm hearing a bit of rumbling that this announcement at quarantine didn't pass muster in the cabinet. I'm trying to feel out to see whether that is so. So if that were true, then clearly you can see what is happening in terms of the management of this country, in terms of policy formation and so on. You know, when you have a situation like this that could backfire in such a major way, both in a human sense, in a social sense, in a political sense, and definitely an economic sense, it shows you what many of us have been saying all along. This government was never ready for any government, and that came to power through means that were less than honest.
Honest, yes. Penny sense and pound foolish.
Yep.
You know, even some of us on this aisle give Jagdio some credit for being a good policy wonk. But what you just explained there, should disabuse us of that view, because a policy wonk would have picked that up. That there you're making a political move that is going to have some terrible economic consequences at the back end. Because in effect, what you are doing, you are destroying what is left of the labor in the sugar industry that you are saying that you want to revive.
Maybe there's also method in the madness, because if ultimately they close the entire industry, then there's no more demands on the treasury to transfer monies. There's this huge set of assets that are now available for sale, you know, to friends and so forth. You understand? So maybe there's some method in the madness. You never know. You have 3 estates that were supposed to be producing roughly 150,000 tons by perhaps the end of next year, maybe the following year. And you have 3 estates already that shortfall by 19 point something% at the half year in terms of the very, very low production level that was set for them. And the same group of people, notwithstanding the fact that they can't meet any production targets or any sort of thing, they're demanding increase in wages, they're demanding increase in allowances and so on and so forth. So you got a situation where the tail is wagging the dog.
Yeah. Winston, there's an interesting question here from David, who's asking, could Mr. Jordan clarify if the $250,000 handout is executed by the Gaisuko board, or is it directly from the government? And how much independence does the board have in on these matters?
Listen, the board is a government board. Board has really and truly, the board there is there for the Companies Act, Corporation Act story, that they're imbued with a certain set of functions. But unlike the coalition government that allowed boards to function and so forth, this government here is saying, listen, we are essentially the board. We just put you there as representatives, and we make these decisions. The board cannot meet and agree to any $250,000 because Gaisuko is literally financed from the government. They don't have $250,000 to give. When the workers struck for wage increases, they struck, the government went in, the government offered $200 million to end the strike. Gaisuko didn't have any money. And let's be honest, unless the money was one-off, it means that the government forever has to find at least $200 million every year to give to Gaisuko. People don't understand these things. Mm-hmm. Unless you give Gaisuko that $200 million as a one-off, then the government will have to find that $200 million every single year to meet that payment, because Gaisuko can't meet it.
So, Mr. Jordan, are we correct to speculate that all these monies that are being transferred to supporters of the government are really debt that will have to be paid from revenues that are expected from mine?
Yes, that's correct. Gaisuko has no, even with the 3 estates, Gaisuko will not have an ability anytime soon to meet its costs. It will not have that. And the government will have to transfer monies all the time. All the time. And the more the workers strike for things like, look, we used to carry home $70 at the end of the week, and the flood now has us carrying home $17, and therefore we want the extra 53 from you. Gaisuko will have to go to the government. Gaisuko will have to go to the government to get the extra 53 to give to them, to get them back to work, and that is what the government agreed to.
Yes.
That is what the government agreed to.
Yeah.
You know? Mm-hmm. I mean, so you have all kinds of things. You have good things mixed up with bad things, good things mixed up with corrupt things. I mean, I'll give you an example. It was stated in public that they lost 20% of the rice crop. Right? That 20% of the rice crop was lost due to flooding. Guess what? At the half year, rice production increased the highest in the agricultural sector by 7.8%. And you lost 20%. 20% of the rice production they claim was lost due to flooding. Yet rice production increased by 7.8%, and the people end up getting the lion's share of the flood transfer. You have people in today, black people in Mahaiko, over my code in all these different places, complaining that their homestead was treated unfairly or they didn't get any money. Some black people get $1,000 and so forth. Rice farmers get per acre, some end up getting millions and millions. And even Ramayo used to be with the AFC. and the coalition in the early days, and who was REO in Region 6 at one time. I heard him on a program bemoaning the fact that a number of people who got monies from this flood transfer cheated the system. Many people who claim that they plant rice, he said never planted a stalk of rice in their life, and they got money. I heard him with my own 2 ears on that program saying this. And he's saying that he was treated as a pariah because he raised these matters. He raised these matters. So that's what you have. Genuine people didn't get any of the flood relief. Genuine people.
Yeah, Winston, I'm interested, as we would say, on the block. Let me go back and tackle the thing we raised there. Rice production increased by 7.8%.
Yes.
Right. But 20% of the crop was lost through flooding.
Yes.
All right. Those are numbers, right? Explain it for us, man. Give the real thing.
Listen, David, I am a numbers person.
Yes.
Like you, I like econometrics. I'm surprised you didn't say that you would have had to do a course called polymetrics.
I didn't even look down the road that far. Since I'm into econometrics, I said, this is for me.
So I like numbers and so on. So I'm still trying to have someone explain to me how you publicly said that 20% of the crop was lost. 20% was lost. But rice production in the half-year budget has increased by 7.8%.
So, if 20% of the crop was lost, you shouldn't have that.
Exactly. Exactly. You understand? Exactly. Because now that you have 7.8% increase, it means that figure is a lie.
That's right.
Therefore, it becomes highly suspicious. The amount of money you paid as flood transfer to supposedly people who lost the crop.
Did they ever say how much money they spent on that flood relief?
They said they had set aside $10 billion for the flood relief. They probably paid somewhere in the region of 7-point-something billion. And the bulk of that went to rice.
To rice farmers. And that they're rice farmers who are non-supporters, theoretically, of the government. I want to be very careful here. Normally I would say they're black rice farmers who either get very little or got nothing at all.
But not only rice farmers, David, you know in that area, West Bobis and so on.
Yeah.
If flooding, it will do a lot to their stocks, the plantain and Edo, cassava. Those are the kind of homesteads that the majority of black people will have. Well, a couple of them, I don't know if a couple of them still are into rice, but maybe a very few. Okay? But a lot of those homesteads would be in that, commercial provisions and vegetables and fruits also and so forth. As can be seen by the heavy shortage in the markets after the floods of ground provision, fruits, vegetables, and so on. But yet still these people weren't compensated in that manner. The bulk of the money was issued to supposed rice farmers. And in all of this, if you could see how the Treasury's money is being used early in this life of this government to placate, to get the other word, you can come to me soon, supporters. By new supporters.
And you may be doing it illegally, as you are insinuating.
You understand? This is how Treasury's money is doing. And now imagine the Auditor General, you had about four different cash transfer schemes. Yet the Auditor General cannot complete one audit. Not even the first audit of the global cash transfer scheme that the government put in place, I think was early this year. And since then, you had cash transfer schemes to pensioners, to flood relief, businesses, all these different cash transfers. And he can't come up with one audit of these cash transfer schemes. And he's hearing these swirling accusations of people who collected monies but weren't supposed to, and still he is not prepared to mount an investigation unless the government can do so. And the Auditor General is a constitutional agency in the Constitution that cannot be dictated to by anyone. No minister, nobody can dictate to them. No minister can tell them to go and do anything.
Right.
Farm them. No minister can tell the Auditor General, look, I want you to go and mount an investigation over there and so on. The Auditor General, in his deliberate wisdom, can decide whether that is something that he wishes to get involved in, or so on and so forth. But yet still, he's hearing these swirling accusations about the flood relief, and he does nothing.
He does nothing. And I remember when you all were in office. Oh, he was on a roll.
Oh Lord. In fact, they even continue down that road. Just a couple of weeks ago, last week or the week before, Mr. Edgell was inviting the Auditor General to do a forensic audit on the elevators of those what do you call them? The things that go over the road for passengers.
Yes, the overpass.
The overpass. He is inviting the Auditor General to do a forensic audit of the non-working elevators. Yeah.
Lord my God.
Yes. Time to produce one report.
Yes. Desiree, you know, you're asking if the increase in production is true, then the percentage loss has to be false, or vice versa. Am I confused? Well, I hope Mr. Jordan has diluted whatever confusion there was.
When I started this program, I tell you I had two things. I gave you one. The second one is that I know numbers well. So I use their numbers and my knowledge to expose them. They don't like that.
They don't like that.
I even heard, I don't know how true it is, because I started raising noise about the fact that the half-year report was not delivered on time, which is no later than 20 minutes. I have put the public domain the fact that the coalition government not only had scrupulously observed the law, but we made sure that the mid-year report was presented before Parliament went into recess. And Parliament usually go into recess around the 10th of August. And we made sure that report was in the Parliament by the 10th of August. You had every year you have up to the 29th of August to send to the National Assembly the half-year report. The half-year report was put out, I think this is what, last week, I believe. Last week, October, well past the deadline. But nobody says anything. No press, no Christopher Ram, my friend, no Gulsaran, no GHK Lal, no anybody. Nobody says anything. In fact, I think I saw in an editorial of the Stabrook News, in the body of the editorial, in brackets, they were making a point that in brackets they put, why so late?
In bracket and in the middle.
So that was a tap on the wrist.
Yes.
Let that happen to the coalition. Let that happen to the coalition. And you see now the skew the biasness and so between how they approach and who approach the coalition versus this thing. And that is where I'm exposing. And so it must be rubbing them the wrong way. But I can tell them, even when I was a member of cabinet, I did not sit and take even what the president was saying. In fact, my colleagues had to keep joking me in my side, you know. But my point is, let all ideas contend.
Yeah.
Whatever decision is made at the end, I will go with it because I'm a member of cabinet. But let all ideas contend. You know, and not the president or you, the vice president, and so on. I can't open my mouth and question you and so I wasn't penalized for doing that in cabinet. You think I'm gonna come now when I'm out of cabinet and probably even just relaxing outside and allow you to continue maligning the coalition government of which I was a part and don't say anything? Or allow you to trot out figures there with some very spurious analysis without I using my training and my experience to bring another view to what you have put out there? No.
Yeah. And Winston, I'm so glad for this program, as I'm glad for all programs that deal with economics. Because like I said, the politics is usually easier to digest than the economics. But the economics teaches us a lot about the political intent of those who are administering these economic policies. And I can tell from the comments of the audience here tonight, which is large, you know, my sister Ellen is asking for transfers to people who didn't plant rice. Really? Really? Yes, Ellen, that is the kind of government we are dealing with. I mean, those of us who lambaste them, even some supporters may think that we exaggerate. But this is what we are dealing with. And so it's good to have someone who's not a political militant to really come and explain the thing to us, you know? And I think that's what we're getting here tonight. Marcia, my sister, yes, they share out the nation's money. If it's there, I'm still waiting on my pink slip money. People with the pink slip, $25,000 saying they're still waiting on that money. Winston, let's shift gears and go to the half-year report, because it says that the prices of food have gone up, what, 14%? The cost of living, 5-point-something%. You've been ringing that bell long before and trying to explain the implications. Let me start out with a general question, and then I'll get into the numbers. In the era of a pandemic and natural disasters like flood, where do the pandemic and the natural disasters stop and government responsibility or lack thereof begins?
Well, David, in any pandemic, first we have to make assessment of how long we think it's going to be. Because if it's just transient, then you may not have to do any drastic. It's like maybe a hurricane, okay, or what's called it, a tsunami. It's going to last either a couple hours or it's going to last maybe 2 days or so on. So if you make that gauge, the next one will be damage assessment. Okay. In this pandemic, you can't make that. All the predictions about the pandemic have gone out the window. Okay, but as time has passed, it becomes more and more predictable about when you likely can come out based on certain steps and measures that you take. For example, if you reach herd immunity, 80% plus vaccination and so forth, it is likely that the effects of the pandemic on your society will lessen and so forth. But to reach that, it is a combination of vaccination, and other measures that you put in place. All right? Now, the severity of the measures that you put in place can be eased after you reach these mileposts. And again, depending on the severity of the measures that you put in place, the government can come in now as the backstopper with policies that will include pricing policies, trade policies, business policies, whether it's assistance by way of concessions, credit, trade credits, loan credits, and so forth, maybe tax credits and so on. All right. Then consumer, and here again it can be tax relief, threshold increases, cash grants, transfers, and so on. Remember last time on this program I said initially I would have given a 6-month cash grant. So one, it becomes predictable to the people, and therefore they can decide how to budget. When you give a 1 month one-off, then they can't budget. They cannot budget. All right? So that will have made it more predictable. And when you make the demand side more predictable, the supply side can begin to do the things that are necessary to increase output. Right? So if I make bread, if I have a bakery and I'm making bread, and I know for the next 6 months, consumers will be getting a cash grant of $50,000, I can decide to ramp up production of bread. Because all these people now are going to have $50,000 for the next 6 months, $300,000 they're going to have, each one of these persons. They're going to be demanding bread, more bread. But if you give these people $25,000 one-off cash grant, that is not going to signal to me that after this month, they are going to be in a position to buy bread. And therefore, I will not call forth the supply. So a number of these measures go in tandem. You can't keep giving on the supply side, that's the private sector and so on, give nothing on the demand side and expect that the supply side will be called forth, so to speak. And that is why in many ways, I keep saying that what the government had done is wrong. It's totally wrong. Do you believe in this foolishness called trickle-down economics? That cannot work. It doesn't work in the developed countries, and it certainly will not work in the developing countries where the systems are not even anywhere near approaching systems that they have in place in developed countries. And in developed countries, they don't work. It hasn't worked. So now we are in this case where the government keeps giving more and more concessions to the private sector in the hope that they will stimulate production and pass on the benefits of that now will trickle down to the consumers. Well, they've lost this game for the last year. They've lost it. And they have ripped the whirlwind, which is raging inflation with no end in sight as to how they will bring it down.
How they will bring it down. So there are a couple of things I want to extrapolate from what you said there. So one, yes, the economy, the state of the economy is driven by the pandemic and to some extent the flood, but that is exacerbated by wrong policy on the part of the government. And secondly, those wrong policies could have an impact or impacts on the economy long after the pandemic.
Correct. Correct. Absolutely correct. Absolutely correct. Look, if you look at the half-year report, at the half year, yes, we got 14.4%, whatever, 5%, whatever growth, right? Yeah. But the magic number to look at is what we call the non-oil growth. That is what's happening in the other sectors of the. You know, the old Marx used to talk about the enclave sector.
Yes.
So the oil sector right now is an enclave sector.
Okay.
Right? Just like how bauxite at one time
Was.
seemed to be an enclave sector. The oil sector right now is an enclave sector. So when you extract the oil sector, highly capital intensive, from the rest of the economy, you have to ask yourself, how the economy is. Okay. So the numbers are in half year, at the half year of 2019, the last full year of the coalition government, growth was 4.2%, if I remember well. At the half year of 2020, growth was negative 6.7%, I think. And at the half year of 2021, growth is 4.8%. So we really have grown. So in 2019, we had no oil because oil came in December 2019.
Right.
So no oil effect on the economy.
And you grow by 4.6%. 4.2%.
In 2021, you grow by 4.8%. You haven't made much of an increase at the after 2 years have elapsed. You haven't, and you had oil. So can you imagine without oil, what would have happened to
this economy?
The economy.
Yeah.
Talk about all this noise about diversification, and the agriculture minister, bless his soul, because he's quite active and so on. You know, you got to give him that. He's all around in different communities and so on. But the agricultural sector was the most disappointing. The agricultural sector pressed at the half year by over 7%. Agricultural sector. The only saving that it didn't do worse is rice. That I told you just grew by 7.8%.
Yeah.
That supposedly lost 20% of its production.
Yeah. Vincent, give us the numbers again. The economy grew by 14.7%.
I don't have the numbers in front of me.
Right, but let me say 14%.
14.7%.
Right? Prices went up by 14%.
5.8%, I think, overall.
Right. The oil.
Yes.
What percentage of...
Okay, so the overall growth was, I think, 14.7%.
Yes.
But the non-oil growth, when you extract oil from the growth,
right,
the growth reduces to 4.8%.
So the bulk of the increase really comes from the oil sector.
From the oil sector, right.
And you made a very important point that the oil sector is not labor intensive.
Right, it's not labor intensive. So it's not a sector that will absorb mass amounts of people. In fact, I made this point before. The fact that the labor intensive sector, which is the agricultural sector, is not growing, has implications for unemployment. Because and incomes, by the way. Because if the agricultural sector does well, you can rest assured that growth is spread at a broader who are employed in the agri sector. Means more households are getting incomes. When the oil sector does well, it doesn't have much to do with households. Very few in that sector. Paid. Although I'm hearing something about of discrimination payments between locals and foreigners, but they're still reasonably well paid relative to agriculture. But only few households will be getting those. So it's always important, even as you have these enclave sectors, for the labor sectors to grow and grow rapidly, because they can be used to fuel the enclave sector by way of food and labor and so forth. So it was very difficult at the half year that the agriculture perform in such a negative manner, and we're hoping that they can claw back, for our own sake. I mean, the government. I don't know why the government feels that you have two Guyanas. we are not here. I'm certainly not here to wish bad for the government. We got to live here. If the government does bad to the economy, we're the one who will suffer. But they realize that all the citizens of Guyana should be active roles in it, regardless whether you're PVP, PNC, and all this kind of thing. You can have this wishes that you're having right now.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Let me ask you this, Winston. How are the other economies in the English-speaking Caribbean, the Anglophone CARICOM countries? How are they faring?
They're not faring. They're not faring well because they also got another enclave sector called tourism. Right? It's enclave in the sense that most of the ingredients for the tourism sector are imported. First of all, the people are imported, the food imported, the investment flows to grow the sector are imported, and so on. So you have very little coming from the local sector. So when that enclave sector goes down, the rest of the economy, catch major coal. And so that is throughout the English-speaking Caribbean, where almost all of them have returned negative growth at the half year, principally due to a non-performing tourism sector.
Mm-hmm. As a region, well, first of all, I have to talk about how do we survive a pandemic that doesn't seem to go away. It fools us every time we seem to have a break. It comes back. But how do small economies, dependent economies like ours in the Caribbean, how do we survive?
Yeah, well, that's unfortunately, that is a question that has been asked by everyone now. In fact, yesterday, I think the other seminar being held by the IMF meeting talking about the same thing. It's not an easy task for those who depend on tourism, but I think the outlook, I would say, should be better than earlier in the year from this standpoint. That on the one hand, the developed countries are easing restrictions on travel, right? So you see from November, for example, United States will allow, travel based on vaccination. Europe and England and so on are, going to be doing the same thing and so on. So planes are going to be back in the sky, numbers are going to be running and so forth. Hotels now are back and so on. So it's a long process, but the light is there at the tunnel.
Light is there at the tunnel.
On the other hand, the negative headwind is that of oil. The price of oil is galloping, right? I think today it's about $80 a barrel or $85 a barrel or something, right? The portents are not very good. It says it may well be over $100 a barrel before the end of the year or by the end of the year and so on. Now, that can't be good for tourism at all right? Because it makes travel expensive, right? And since oil is an intermediate input into almost everything, it will also make the prices of goods, ancillary and other goods, expensive. And so that will have an impact on inflation. And anytime inflation starts spreading its wings, you have the trade unions come in and talk about increased wages. Yeah, so you may very well end up in a spiral until somebody decides to cut it. At the very time when you have high numbers of unemployment due to the pandemic and the closure of businesses.
Yeah. Yes. Winston Jordan here giving us Economics 101, at least Economics 101. It may be more than Economics 101. It may be Economics 401. We getting it tonight because we've learned so much about what goes on behind the numbers, behind the scenes, things that we don't pay attention to on a daily basis. Here is the economist putting it in perspective for us. Winston, as we end, we have a government which is not governing in the spirit of inclusion. And so therefore, it has not sought to bring the talents and the ideas of the opposition on board. Where does that leave opposition people like yourself who have ideas about what to do? What do you do in such a situation?
Well, I personally will do. I would continue. Look, I don't want anything from the government. You know, I will tell you and your viewers, I'm quite happy to be home and relax, help with my grandson and his virtual teaching, you know, and just generally take things light. You know, I don't want anything from the government. I've been there, done that, so to speak. But I've always shared my ideas and my views. I worked with PPP governments for a long while, prepared budgets, policy papers, advice, you know, and so on. So it's nothing new for me, so to speak. My major concern is that the government does not seem to want to include particularly people who they label, whether they label them as black or opposition or whatever the case may be. And this is a substantial part of the population called Guyana. That's the first point. Second point is the government treats Guyana as if it is their plantation. And as I said this morning on Kadaki, I don't know whether you would have read Ramatar's statement to October the 5th, something that they had at Red House or something. I don't know if you've read it. But he was talking about his concern that multinationals may have a big influence on elections in Guyana going forward.
Yeah.
But having expressed that concern, he was more concerned that this influence may tamper with the built-in majority of the PPP.
Yes, that was a concern, yes.
And, you know, I mean, if you really want to be really angry, you could get angry because of the speech. Because it tells you, don't worry, all them elections we are going to every 5 years and so on. We're going to win anyhow.
Yeah.
Built-in majority. And only we can solve this problem of race.
Yeah.
Because in that text he also says, look what we have done for all the different communities. And it's not reflected in the votes we get.
Mm-hmm.
You understand? So when you see things like that, it tells you these people don't want you, me, and you, and whoever looks at me and you, or whoever's labeled opposition and so on, to partake in national development. They don't want it, and this is what is really bad for this country. When you think you know it all, number one, when you think we have to make ourselves subservient to you because you feel this is your plantation and we are interlopers on this plantation, I think you have another thing coming. Because if it is interpreted in this rather drastic manner in which I am interpreting it, this government must be prepared to have serious opposition as it goes forward, which is really sad. Really sad. Because I still believe we got enough talent in Guyana that if we could eschew all the racism and the discriminatory practices, can indeed make Guyana a place that everybody wants to be in. But right now, as I said, when you go and look at the partisan approach to development of this country, partisan approach to development, the kind of donkey attitude, you know, I mean, you think a government can just wake up, decide to share out $250,000 to a select group without understanding that it will have a backlash or implication? Or deciding, look, we know it's going to have a backlash, but don't worry that we will deal with that or something? I mean, what kind of government is this? I mean, you think the coalition government will ever, first of all, decide on such a thing, number one, or didn't understand what will happen if they went down such a road? I'm really honestly feel that if we had decided to give $250,000 to the bauxite workers, who would have perhaps been rightly do such when the severance and so on wasn't paid. But you imagine what the kind of pressure we will put under, not only by the government, but all their acolytes and so forth. So there seems to be no social cohesion capital in this country, and I have a difficulty with that. I continue to share my views uninterrupted, unintimidated. They can't intimidate me. They can't intimidate me. I will not be intimidated. So he could do whatever he wishes. I will not be intimidated.
Former Minister under the coalition, Winston Jordan, telling it like it is, giving us a full dose tonight of how the economy is being manipulated by the PPP to carry out its campaign promises, to carry out its larger agenda of domination. And for those in our midst who sometimes get impatient and say that we're talking too much and we have to go out and get the revolution going, you tonight, I hope, realize how much we don't know. If you're fighting a revolution, you got to know what you're fighting against. And as I keep saying, there's a lot that we do not know. And that is why these programs that utilize the skills of the people who are available to us and who are in the halls of power, it's very important. Do not underestimate what this knowledge that we got here tonight and other nights do in terms of empowering you and mobilizing you. I mean, Mr. Ramatar said that multinationals will determine elections. He's right, except his stance is bad. Multinationals have impacted. In a sense, they're admitting what we have been saying for the last year and a half. The 2020 elections were influenced by external forces. Look, Ramatar saying it. And the news media doesn't pick it up and highlight it. All right? The man talked about the 11 small parties that were created as the precedent for what he's talking about. The man is admitting what we have been saying. That the 2020 elections were influenced a lot by external forces. But you see, we have a media that don't see that as no newsworthy. That is why we have to come to these alternative media and take advantage of our experts to bring those things to bear. Any closing thoughts, Winston?
Well, once again, as I said, thank you for bringing me on to 101. It's always a pleasure to be able to respond and share views, exchange ideas, and so on. I'm always there to try to give the other view, and the other view meaning that the one that is not the government view. Some may coincide at times with the government, but most of the times they are not. But certainly I would like to give you it unvarnished, analytical, and keep it, as I say, tightly packaged, so to speak. So I hope your viewers enjoy the program, and we can do this again as necessary, so that we can bring all the news, the views, and so forth to the viewers, and that they don't become despondent and thinking that all is lost. All is not lost, but what it needs is for more of us to refuse to be kowtowed, as we said, to refuse to be bowed or cowed, as they say, to refuse to be intimidated, and to tell our truths as we were. So be it. Don't like it, who vex, as they say. But so be it. But one thing I will leave your viewers to know, it will not go down easy with this second attempt to malign my my person and my character in public. It will not go down well. I can promise you that.
And certainly we will keep on top of that development. And so we will bring you back perhaps sooner rather than later. Winston Jordan, thank you very much for coming on. And to you, the audience, as always, thank you for staying with us. Thank you for believing that we are doing something useful. I see a lot of my friends who were on the campaign trail last year, they're here. I know despondent people have become, but we've got to regroup and we've got to use these resources in order to stay alive politically, because if we don't, the writing is already on the wall, and our aim is always to attack that writing on the wall and to remove it, and to write our own narratives on that wall. Next week, Thursday, we are going to be doing Politics 101, a town hall meeting. The one with Aubrey Norton was quite successful on Tuesday night, and so by popular request, people are asking for one with the other declared candidate of the People's National Congress and leader, Dr. Richard Van West Charles. So we're going to be doing a town hall meeting with Dr. Van West Charles next Thursday on Politics 101, which has become the program for the town hall meetings of those who are vying for top positions in the People's National Congress. As I say over and over, these are not campaign events. These are events to give you, the viewers, a chance to question the candidates directly. And so next Thursday, Dr. Richard Van West Charles, the advertisement will go out by tomorrow, and you will get information as to where to register in order to get into the studio. I want to thank all those who made the Aubrey Norton Town Hall a success, and it was a great success. All those who helped, all those who contributed. This weekend, we're going to have it on Channel 9. I will request that they replay it sometime during the week next week. And we'll do the same thing with Dr. Richard Van West Charles. And I understand that Mr. The opposition leader in Parliament has announced, I haven't seen the formal announcement yet, Mr. Harmon. And once he makes his announcement, we will open Politics 101 for a town hall meeting with him. In fact, the last time he was on, he promised a town hall meeting, and I haven't bothered him, he was on leave and so on. So, but we'll do Richard Van West Charles next Thursday. Look out for the advertisement, and you will get information as to where to register. Thank you all very much. It's almost the weekend. Do take some time and relax. You know, sometimes you have to move away from the intensity of the politics and relax a little bit, you know. Do what you do for relaxation, but always, as always, keep praying for our country. If you're a praying person, keep hoping. You know, Jesse Jackson said, keep hope alive. And he's so right. Keep hope alive until I see you all again on Monday. Bye-bye.
Please help keep Politics 101 on social media and broadcast television. If you are in North America, please donate via Cash App or PayPal.
If you are in Guyana and the Caribbean and don't have access to Cash App and PayPal, email your pledge to dhines6106@aol.com and we will direct you how to get your donation to us. Thank you in advance for your donation.